This episode of the CUInsight Experience is brought to you by Allied Solutions. With over 40 years of experience, our friends at Allied Solutions are focused on helping more than 4,000 clients grow their bottom line, protect their business and members, and evolve to stay ahead of the competition. Welcome to episode 133 of the show. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and I'm excited everyone's here today. This show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement who make it so great. Today, I am lucky enough to have a conversation with Lily Newfarmer. Lily is the president and CEO of Tarrant County's credit union, TCCU. Also, the founder of CUWLA and the board chair. So that's the Credit Union Women's Leadership Alliance. Let's jump right in. Lily, welcome to the show, my friend.
Oh, hi, Randy. Nice to see you. Happy to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you run crazy. So we were talking about that before you got on. So you seem to be everywhere, and I love seeing you everywhere. So that's always a good thing. So I appreciate you today. I'd like to take this back. I've had conversations with you at events before, so I know that you have a fun story. Tell us a little bit about that. How'd your career start? How did it get you where you are today in credit unions?
Yeah, it's actually a strange one. I'm an Air Force brat, lived around the world, studied abroad, graduated from the University of Madrid. And then I stayed and worked overseas for a few years, right? So I came back to the U.S. to spend some time with my family, I guess around the mid-'80s. But I had no intentions of staying. Like my home was in Spain, really, essentially. And so I was thinking maybe 6 months tops was as long as I was going to stay. But I needed to do something with my time. And it needed to be like near where my dad worked because I didn't have a car and I had no intentions of buying a car.
Right, because you weren't staying.
I wasn't staying. And so my dad had a good friend who served on the board of directors at the credit union who served the military folks there at the base. And they were always looking for employees since they mostly hired military spouses who would then leave, right, as soon as they got assignments elsewhere. And so I met with the CEO and I made it really clear that I wasn't staying, but that I could help while I was there. And so actually, Randy, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but 9 years later, I was still at that credit union. It was my first gig, if you will, at a credit union, and it kind of just got in my blood. But in the meantime, my dad retired from the Air Force, and he and my mom moved to Texas. Within 5 years, I followed them to Texas, kind of got tired of the cold and snow because I was up in Rapid City, South Dakota. Beautiful territory, but really, really cold. Anyway, so where I was hired at Tarrant County's credit union, and within 4 years, became the CEO and kind of really started my path and my journey.
Do you remember, growing up in a military family, do you remember the first time you heard of a credit union or knew what one was?
My dad, God love him, and he's been gone now for 20 years, but when he died, we learned he was a member of 8 different credit unions. Everywhere he would be assigned, he would feel the need, right, to establish an account at that credit. And then he believed in them so strongly that he could never close his account there. Like he had a little bit of change in each little shop, and it was interesting. But no, I really originally heard from him just because I know his first auto was financed at a car, his first personal loan, his first mortgage. And so he was a huge fan. Never really served on a credit union board in a volunteer capacity, but I think he would have loved to had he been given the opportunity.
That's fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about credit unions right now. What has you most excited as you look forward? And I would absolutely love to hear what you're working on right now. So, and I'm sure everybody else would as well.
Well, I will say this, and especially as I'm getting a little long in the tooth, I'm really starting just to look about when I'm gone, but mostly knowing and what gets me excited about our movement looking forward is knowing that we're going to be in really good hands. I'm just such a big fan of our young credit union professionals. They're smarter than we were. They're open. They're inclusive. They're diverse. They're not afraid to take chances. And I just think they're awesome. I'm so impressed. Now, admittedly, I'm a little partial because I have 3 family members, young credit union professionals. They're all in the movement. I see and feel their passion. Really, we just need to get out of their way, Randy, right? And we'll do so in due time. Maybe some of us should sooner than later, but that's probably for another podcast. But I'm really, really excited. I think they will be the game changers for us. I really do.
I will tell you, Lily, with Jill in the house, I am privy to a lot of the human capital side of things, and I'm actually surprised at the amount of turnover that is happening. I think our industry might look a lot different 5 years from now with some of that young blood coming up. So.
Admittedly, and they are so brave. I'm just anyway, any chance I get to be around, because I think I'm pretty cool for a middle-aged woman.
We all think you're pretty cool.
I think I'm pretty woke, right? And so I feel like now my kids will say, "Stop talking, Mom." But
of course,
but for the most part, I think I'm pretty cool. But another thing that I'm really excited about is you mentioned a little bit about CULA. I'm excited that smaller credit unions are starting to get more system support than we have in the past. So it used to be that we would simply just be discounted. I mean, what could we possibly know? How could we possibly contribute? But over the last few years, I'm starting to see a shift, and I think that's great. And you had mentioned CULA, which is myself and 12 other amazing female CEOs of smaller credit unions. And really with the support of CUNA and CUNA Mutual Group, we created an organization called CULA, which stands for Credit Union Women's Leadership Alliance. And our mission primarily is to provide a safe space for women CEOs of smaller credit unions, where we support one another and we share best practices. But the ultimate goal is around the sustainability of smaller credit union, which is primarily ran by women. And so we just completed our inaugural year, which we're really excited. The system support has been amazing. And, it really showed that there was a need for this organization. CULA, we now have 86 members and growing. Our first annual membership meeting is coming up. We're looking to launch our signature program. It's a mentorship program called CULA Coaching. We're going to be partnering once again with the National Credit Union Foundation, where we'll be offering a workshop around just empathy, mindfulness, self-care, and we'll be offering that to our members. And we're planning our first in-person conference in Santa Fe in September. So there are worse places to be in September. So
absolutely.
We're just so excited. I mean, look, we're exhausted. These other 12 ladies have worked their tails off. And as a big shout out to them, we're exhausted but excited, if that makes sense at all.
I understand that. And what I would say, anything that's coming up, please send it over to us. We will put that all in the show notes. So if people want more information, I have to ask you a question, kind of going back, that you said over the last few years, you feel like maybe smaller credit unions' voices is getting heard more. Could that be from the group, like you and these other 12 ladies who are kicking down doors, or what's that?
Well, the fact that we've been doing this for 1 year, now individually we've been doing it, but collectively as a group where we are really trying to just assist and help. But no, I think ultimately there's been a shift probably the last few years, and CULA's been around for incorporated for a year, been doing some work on the back end for a year prior to that. But I think it's just that folks are starting to recognize that smaller credit unions matter. We matter to the movement. And not just because there's magic in numbers, which I believe there are.
I agree.
And certainly not that some smaller credit unions might need to be acquired. I'm not saying that some shouldn't. But I think now there's sort of been this shift on what can we do to support so that we're here to serve our members 5, 10, 12 years from now, right? However many years.
I mean, it's even crazy since we started CUInsight to think about the numbers of credit unions and how many fewer there are now.
Correct.
So it breaks my heart. Let me ask you this. If I remember correctly, you're also on the foundation board. You mentioned them, and we love Gigi and everybody over there. I've known you over the years. You've always been involved. I've also often wondered how you have the time to be involved in as much. Why is it so important for you to be involved in the bigger movement as a whole outside the four walls of TCCU?
I kind of just feel an obligatory give back. And so I feel like I have information and I have a story to tell. And sometimes I want to shout it from the rafters just because it's so important what we do. And it matters to our employees, to our members, to just the greater good. And so for me, keeping it internally makes it a secret, and it shouldn't be a secret. We need to, just go out and share. And so to the point that I feel like, especially like with my team members, good thing I have really thick skin because they they sometimes don't make eye contact with me. And I feel like that may happen sometimes just out in the industry where they're like, oh God, here she comes, right? Don't look at her way or look at it. To me, it's just kind of part of my DNA. It's something that my dad taught me, long time ago, in have confidence, have passion, and go out and conquer where you can. Nothing that's this good should be a secret. And so my board has always been very supportive in go forth and conquer, right? And so that's the mantra or the directive they gave me from day one, 22 years ago, when we were a $20 million shop. And I said, well, you picked the right girl, because that's sort of what I'm all about to my core anyway. Yeah, sharing.
Let me ask you this. And I know you mentioned, part of the mentorship program that's coming up and things of that nature. In the smaller credit unions, how do you provide opportunity for employees when maybe there's not as many paths as, say, if you were working for some huge company? Like, how do you still allow for that personal growth that most of us all need to have fulfilling careers? Sorry, that wasn't on the list, but I'm scratching my own itch now.
Actually, I like that. I will say this, and you just, as the leader, you have to find a way. You have to find a way. And so you're going to spend money on training education. You're going to send folks. And I get the really smaller shops. It's harder to get out of the office. But kind of one of the beauty things about COVID was that now we live in this virtual space where you can get training and education and attend a conference virtually without having to close the credit union for 3 days. But it's really a concerted effort. I mean, one of my biggest budgetary items year over year is in training. And so we send folks to get certifications, and we send folks to school, and also ask, what do you want to do in credit unions? Because ultimately we want you to stay here. And then we teach and coach and mentor and send you to training to get what you need to do. Now, a lot of smaller credit unions, and maybe larger too, say, I'm not a fan in sending folks to DE or to any form of CUNA school or formal training, because in the end, they meet people and they just leave you. And so what I say is, you don't want to stay in a marriage that isn't working. Why would you want someone to be with you that doesn't want to be with you? Absolutely. So I liken it to that. You kind of, like I said, set the path, support them. And if in the end they leave because they found rosier, greener grass, so be it. Hopefully they go to another credit union. But I'm going to tell you, Randy, in all the years, I never had one employee leave that I have supported and sent through schools and training and what have you to another credit union ever.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, I'm going to take a moment. We mentioned Gigi already, but now we have to give a shout out to Chad and say everybody should be DEs.
Yes.
I found it life-changing, actually. So when I did it years back. Another scratch my own itch question here. How did you, and maybe just briefly, has your board always bought in on the education part? You mentioned that being a big line item part of your budget. I could see some boards, maybe especially in tougher economic times, pushing back against that. Has this been something that your boards always saw the value or the priority in as well? Always,
always, always. And to the point where really over the last 2 years with margins as tight as they are, I was like, this is just whatever we can do virtually, we'll do. And they were unhappy about that. And also their own training, right?
Yep,
they
absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. And so, they're not educators. They are primarily business professionals, a couple that work for the county at a higher level, but mostly, degreed. And they value education likely more than anything. And, they really believe in there's power and knowledge. And that's just where they've always come from, that space. So I've never had a single board member or the active board saying, why did we spend that? I mean, conferences, registration is upwards of $1,300, $1,400, $1,500 a pop. And so it's not that we don't bat an eye at that, because certainly, we go, wow, okay, but you get so much out of it that it's always been, never any pushback from the board.
I agree there. Let me ask you this. When you're talking about your team, maybe in particular your leadership team, we all talk about culture quite a bit, but I kind of like to step it back a little bit. When you're building that team or you're bringing somebody new onto your team, what are you looking for? Like, what characteristics play into kind of your decision-making process? And then the flip side of that, Is there like something somebody could say in an interview to you that you're just like, nope, that's it. Nope, you're not. You will never work here. Sorry.
Well, skill set is really important, right? But, I always look for attitude and a willingness to learn. As I grew up in credit unions, there's nothing I didn't do. I plunged toilets. I shoveled snow. I mowed grass at one of the branches. But then just anything else that, this was before you could Google something to figure out how to do it. They'd say, "Hey, Lily, do you know how to do?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And didn't have a clue. I bought one of my first cars when I moved to the U.S. was a manual transmission. I had no idea how to drive one. But that's the one I wanted, and I drove it, and I learned. And so I look for attitude, a willingness to learn. And the other thing that I learned that I've changed my mind, but only through COVID, is I look for flexibility and agility. And I think we need to teach more about this skill set because it takes courage. It takes courage to be a leader. And being immobile with fear and uncertainty doesn't work.
Our movement's changing very quickly also, right? So I can see why that would become a trait
you're hiding under the desk because you're afraid and you don't know what the next step is and you're afraid that you're going to get COVID. Or that is not a skill set I need on my team.
Right. Absolutely. So, you and I have been around for a while, and for a long time, I think we almost gave credit unions and our movement a pass that we tended to move slow on things. But we did see during COVID that we can also move really fast. So we have that ability to keep with that agility. How do you make sure that kind of you're not getting stuck in that this is the way we've always done it and that you're keeping pace with all the, disruption and all the fun stuff that's, I guess, going on with the future of credit unions?
That's the way we've always done it. That just isn't part of in my team's vocabulary. And so, as a smaller credit union, Randy, we have no choice. We have to take on new risks and innovate. It's just a matter of surviving, right? And sometimes it feels like we're boiling the ocean. We don't have scale. But doing nothing just is not ever an option. So, I don't always know, but I really have always led with my intuition. So when I know something, I just know, and it's really clear. And then I pull the trigger as fast as I can. Now, this can sometimes be overwhelming for my team.
I was just going to ask you the flip side of that, though. What if when you're wrong? Because this has been one of the toughest things for me to learn. Like, if I think something's going to work, I just want to put my head down and I want to force it to work. But sometimes it's even better to go, whoa, we only have, you mentioned small credit union. I'm a small business owner, right? Like, we only have so many resources, so much time. If it's not working, it may be the time to pivot and do a different direction. You're trusting your gut, you're feeling it, and then all of a sudden you're like, crap, my gut was wrong.
Yeah. So the first thing is to admit, oh, crap, my gut was wrong, right? And get past like, I can't show I'm weak. No, admit it, be transparent. And then I'm telling you, one of the beauties, if there's anything good in smaller credit unions, is that we're pretty nimble. So how do you kill a project quickly if you can, right? And you try to just do damage control where you can and really just say, oops, I'm sorry.
That didn't work.
That was really a wrong assessment. And this is what we're going to do instead. Yeah, it's not easy either.
No, that has been a struggle of mine that I hope that I could say I'm getting a little better at. So not touching the stove the second time, right? Like, it's like, oh, no.
Still hot.
It's still hot. Yeah, I got it. I'll try one more time. So, now that you have your team, and I know from talking to you in the past, you have a pretty tight-knit team there. How do you give feedback? I'm sure, and we don't have to call anybody out by name, right? But I'm sure there was a time that somebody, didn't live up to your expectations or disappointed you. How do you deliver feedback? And, I guess, what's the outcome been? And I'm going to ask you another question. Is this something you've had to learn over time, or is this something that you've always kind of been that natural leader?
I'm pretty thick-skinned and not a whole lot offends me or makes me crazy. But I didn't realize I'm much better now that not everyone has that level of lack of sensitivity, right? And so I would just get it out, right? And then I'm happy because I got it off and everybody else is like, over in the corner, like crying or whatever. And so That's not good. But just over time, we have learned, especially in the 22 years at this credit union at Tarrant Counties, is we have a mantra and it's called speak your truth.
Okay.
And so it is really all about, and you know, Randy, sometimes it's really hard because there's things we have to share and or hear about ourselves that we don't necessarily like. But also, no one gets up in the morning driving to work and says, my goal today is to be the crappiest employee ever. I plan on coming and just being mediocre. No, I mean, so for the most part, folks are doing their best. But when there's stuff that just needs to be addressed, we start with, hey, I need to speak my truth. And then that sort of sets the ground. Okay. And I've had team members come to me and say, hey, Lily, you know, this and the XYZ about you, and I'm coming and I'm speaking my truth. And that instantly tells me, oh boy, this is okay, get my, you know, and 9 times out of 10, we know innately sort of our shortcomings. We just don't like others to point them out to us.
To see them also, right?
I know. I'm like, yep, you're right about that. And so I've gotten better at it over time, but I'm by no means an expert or good at it.
Any tips to creating that space where your team feels like they can be honest with you, right? Like, and be direct with you?
Yeah. And I think it's where you really, as a leader, I've always come from a place of being very vulnerable and very transparent. And I think when you start using common language, like, I need to speak my truth, when you start having that at every level, not just at the CEO and the execs, but all the way down, I feel like then that starts creating a culture of where it's going to be okay for you to speak your truth and come from a place of vulnerability. And you're not going to likely, unless it's something, you know, lose your job. And no one has ever lost their job for speaking their truth, by the way.
Right. So let me ask you that, and this kind of ties into a question, whether it's a CEO or a leader in general. Let's say that young leader that wants to be a CEO, that transition that's kind of happening, they'd love to take your chair someday. What do you think makes a good CEO or makes a good leader?
Oh gosh. So I just mentioned a couple, like transparency, and I think being vulnerable. I mean, my team has seen me cry. Not often, but usually it's just because I'm really mad about something, but very sad occasions as well. But the other thing is, I would never ask my team to do something that I wouldn't do. Now, no one ever wants me to be a teller because we'd be in big trouble, and I'd probably be, I don't even know. But I just feel like you have to lead by example, and it's okay to say, I don't know. I don't know. As opposed to maybe making something up so that as the CEO, you're supposed to know everything, but you can't, right? And so I would just say that just be as genuine as you can. People figure you out, man. You may think that you are pulling one over. They, especially my team, they know. And they'll call you out. But more importantly, if you're yourself all the time, just your genuine self, then folks will likely trust you and follow you. And that's, sort of what I think.
I love that. I'd like to pivot a little bit to the board. One of the things that I've found over the last few years of people that I've known become CEOs, that the board relationship tends to be the one that maybe they didn't have the most experience with. Like, as the CEO, my guess is you probably shield some stuff, not intentionally, not like trying to hide it, but you kind of take the bullets from both sides. So when that person, even if they thought they were in the boardroom for meetings and things like that, they didn't realize a lot about the CEO. And sometimes there's that relationship where maybe they have great intentions, but, they think that their way's right. And that's it. How do you navigate not the amazing board member, but the one that maybe is just a little more difficult? And then this really is directed more for that person who's maybe never been a CEO yet, but they want to be.
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was a new CEO and I was 34, thought I knew everything, and what I now know is I knew nothing. But anyway, a lot of it is gaining the trust. And a lot of times they're like, I don't know about that, Lily. But there has been in the past couple either naysayers or just not. First of all, I was so much younger than them. Also a female. with some crazy ideas on how to grow and what we needed to do. And what I found was, and there were times that I would leave a board meeting frustrated, like, had a really great chair who would rein in, if you will. And I just had to let my chair do his job. But on the times that that leadership wasn't at the board meetings, I really, what I found was ultimately, if the majority of the board is all on one page and a couple, three are not, it tends to work out. Like you just but you got to be patient and you just keep proving your worth. You keep showing up. You're respectful. You answer questions that they may have and or even insults. How could you possibly know what you're talking about? And you just come from a place of grace and give them grace. And it's not easy, but, and I'm pretty hot-headed. So it would take everything in my power to just smile and agree, because the majority felt a certain way. That would be very, very problematic. I didn't have that, fortunately, and I still don't have that, fortunately. But, on any given election, you don't know who you're going to get or what you're going to get. Sometimes it's just a toss-up. And so I would just say, keep your cool, man. Keep your cool, because nothing is worth your job.
And it sounds like play the long game.
Yes, play the long game. That's exactly right.
So you mentioned this earlier when it came to like training and development, but what does working in credit unions look like, in the future when you think about that? It was kind of a common thought that you couldn't have remote workforces and things like that. And we saw that we still functioned. So what do you think for that? Like, what's the draw? What does working for credit unions look like down the road?
Yeah, it's certainly going to be different. And I think what we're trying to figure out is how everybody can work from home. And some credit unions are doing that now. A couple of smaller credit unions even, I'm so proud of them, where they've closed all of their facilities and they're all working from home. Their offices are at home. And one credit union in particular, the CEO is a CULA founder, is booking more loans than she has in her history. And so I'm just watching that so carefully. I'm very intrigued. I think it's going to look totally different. It has to, Randy, because digital, to me, that's the game changer. And many credit unions are already heavily in this space, and that's great. There's still a lot that have to play catch up that aren't where they need to be. Probably, once again, smaller credit unions. But, I know that if I have to come into a credit union branch, if I don't want to, like if I want to, or if I have a need or desire, I have an issue, that's fine. But if I don't want to, and yet you're saying that's the only way I can conduct business with you, I'm not going to grow. And I'm certainly not going to attract our younger potential members, period.
I agree with you. Well, in the first season of the show, I used to ask this question, and it's been on my mind again recently. And it's that idea of like, I had this kind of view that technology could be the kind of great equalizer. So like a small credit union could offer many of the services that a Bank of America could offer because of technology today. But a lot of people felt the exact opposite, right? Like that it was like, no, it's expensive. It's new. You know what I mean? Like it's actually hurting small credit unions. When you look at technology, you obviously can't offer everything, but do you view that as an equalizer or do you view it as a deterrent?
I think, look, most members don't really care your asset size. They don't know. They don't care what your capital. They don't know margins are tight, nor should they care, right? I mean, really, unless you're really in trouble and then you have share insurance issues. But I think it can be an equalizer. But here's what I know. It is an expensive endeavor. It really is. And it's also a little scary in that it's a new language. I mean, when we just talk about digital, like Bitcoins, that freaks people out. And so let's call it digital money instead of cryptocurrency, because that sounds scary. And so I feel like it's just not for the faint of heart. But I think, especially for smaller credit unions, especially those that have a substantial amount of capital, they need to spend it on this infrastructure, period. They just have to, because it's the competitive advantage, but it's also, again, around being here, however many years down the road, sustainability. And so now, how do smaller credit unions that recognize they need to get in this space, how can they afford it if their margins are tight or they don't have capital. Again, that's a whole nother conversation, but I just think it's critically important that we get in this space quickly.
I agree with you. So let's have a little fun with some rapid fire questions to wrap up the show.
I know that's how you do.
Yeah, that's right. So when was the last time that you were amazed, whether it's personally or professionally?
Well, okay. So professionally would absolutely have to be as I just witnessed the work and resiliency of my team during COVID. So all of our branches are located inside county property. And we don't have a single drive-through, not a single one where we could serve members, at a safe distance. Members were not pleasant, nor were they kind a lot of times. But my team worked through it for 8 weeks when the county actually closed all but one of their facilities. They rotated shifts, they worked from home. They actually worked, Randy. I mean, productivity levels were extremely high. And, my executive team, they never missed a single day. They could work from home. They could work from home before COVID. And they didn't. They showed up every day. And we sat in what we call the war room. It's our conference room. And just trying to figure out, what are we going to do? What's this going to look like? On a personal level, my family has been and is currently going through a lot. And it's really, really hard. But we rally around one another and love each other. And this may be what families do, right? And maybe some don't. But so it may not be as amazing to some, but to me, it never ceases to amaze me. It's the power of love on both counts. On both counts.
But let me ask you this, and this kind of goes back to where I started, which was you're everywhere. You're involved in a lot. Often being the leader, and I've had this conversation with many people, it kind of sometimes gets in the way of those personal relationships you were just talking about, right? 22 years in as a CEO and who's been very actively involved in our movement. Any tips, hacks for other leaders out there? I think our ears are always open on how to balance this life we share with others. I'm
absolutely the worst person to ask. I have no balance. My work is my life. No, I will say that it's so important to carve out time for your friends, for your family. And when you go, oh man, I don't know how I'm going to swing that, you just do. Because what you miss out on are the life's nuggets that help you get to the next step. My family would probably argue in that I don't do that enough. But, my son and I, one thing that he and I have in common is we love baseball. And so we're on a mission to visit a different park once or twice a year. And we were a little nervous about this year, right, with everything going on with baseball. But it looks like it's a go. And so we're going to be planning our first trip. And then my daughter is an outdoorsy nature. Her thing is camping. Now, my thing is not camping, but I will stay at a nice place. And so we're looking to do that. But it's literally sitting down with both of them and saying, when is this going to happen? And then just visiting friends. I have a great group of girlfriends. We carve out time every year to go on a girls' trip and just things that kind of revitalize, the soul, if you will. So important to do that.
That's fantastic. Let me ask you this. What's the greatest album of all time?
Oh, okay. I have 3. Okay. And this is really probably going to age me, but it's also all around my formative years. So absolutely Marvin Gaye, What's Going On?
Fantastic.
Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, and the Eagles, Hotel California.
Which I don't know if this tells you the average age of CEOs, but I do believe in 4 years, Hotel California may be the most popular answer to that question. So,
has anyone said Marvin Gaye?
I think you may be the first. There might be a chance that somebody else did. I was trying to think, but you may be the first on that one. So that may be the first. So what's the best piece of advice you've ever received and who gave it to you?
This would have to be from my dad, and he was a staunch, military man and really serious and kind of crotchety most days, but big heart. And he always said, again, it's around your instinct. Trust your instinct, right? What is your true north, if you will? And then just believe in yourself. He used to always say, what good is your intuition if you keep second guessing? And it just drowns everything out. The worst enemy of success really is self-doubt. It's that do something, pull the trigger. Yeah. Don't sit around. Don't be a victim. We had to salute him a lot of times. I mean,
the military family. So let me ask this. Is there a book that you've either gifted over the years or you think everybody should read?
Yeah, I've gifted this one on more than one occasion, and I probably really need to reread it again. But Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Absolutely.
I love that book. Primarily, it's about a book about suffering and loss and its tragedy, the human condition at its core. But to me, it was really mostly about survival.
Absolutely.
And about hope.
The college I went to, they had every semester a book that everybody at the school had to read. And that was the book one semester. And then I found it and reread it, I bet 5 or 10 years ago. And it was amazing then, but it was even more amazing, I think, as I matured. But yeah, fantastic book. Couldn't agree with you more on that. So when you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind and why?
Oh, so success in the terms of just socioeconomics, right? There's a few I could name, right?
Whoever that person is that popped in, it doesn't have to be.
Well, I don't have a person because I feel like everyone has their issues and demons, engages success differently. You look at someone outwardly and you think they got it going on. They have everything. They have a beautiful family. You don't need for much. They have a couple of homes. Their kids are beautiful and successful. All the things, right? But then you get to know them to their core and you're like, oh, golly, I didn't know that they had X, Y, Z. So I just feel like if you can get through this life, right, enduring heartaches and disappointments and still find beauty and joy, and that you can still treat others with respect and dignity, to me, that's success. And I know a few people that fit that, and socioeconomics aside, they're successful in their own right.
Absolutely. That's why I love that question. We all can define success differently. I think when Jill interviewed me after season 1, I said the first one that came up in my mind was a dive master in Roatan, Honduras, who was categorizing turtles in a notebook for no reason but his own. It wasn't like he was a part of some other group. And I'm like, he was just so happy, Ted, to see another turtle. So I'm like, he felt successful because he was living his best life, right?
Yeah.
So. Anyways, Lily, I appreciate so much you being on the show. Is there any final thoughts you'd like to share or asks of our listeners today?
I don't think so. I'm such, again, I think a big part of who I am is just around resiliency and hope. And for me, it's really around keeping the hope alive, if you will. We have another mantra in my credit union that says hope is not a strategy, but really it kind of can be, right? And maybe it's the most important strategy before you get down to the nitty gritty stuff that you really need to do around creating a roadmap to get you to where you need to go. But keep hope alive is what I would say. I think that's it. This has been a blast.
Oh, well, thank you so much. We'll link to everything we talked about in the show notes so people can find out about everything. Thank you so much for taking the time, my friend. This is awesome. This has been so much fun.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. A few things before we go, folks. Make sure to check out Allied Solutions in the show notes. I'm grateful for their support of the podcast and allowing me to have this much fun doing what I do. Please also subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We're on them all. And while you're there, we'd appreciate a 5-star review if you think we're worth it. If not, forget I asked. It really does help with the visibility of the show. And if you're looking for Man's Search for Meaning or any book that's ever been mentioned on the show, a quick Google search of the CUInsight Experience book list, and you'll have your next read on its way from Amazon. But certainly last but not least, I thank Lily for taking her time today and all of you for listening. Y'all rock. And I appreciate the kind words that come in and getting to be allowed to have this much fun doing this show. Be well, friends, and I hope to see you all soon.